Are you stuck staring at your W-2? Are tax refund worries holding you back? You probably have FOMO, the fear of messing up. The fix? Using TurboTax on Intuit Credit Karma. They find every credit and deduction to help you get every refund dollar you deserve, or your money back. It's time to overcome your fear of messing up and get your taxes done right. Start filing today in the Credit Karma app.
For the News and Observer and the NC Insider, I'm Dawn Vaughan, your host for Under the Dome, on Monday, September 19th, 2022. I'm here today with my colleague, Will Doran. We're 7 weeks from Election Day and even earlier than that for absentee and early voting. As we've mentioned in past podcast episodes, national names are coming to North Carolina to campaign. Vice President Kamala Harris was just here. Of course, she's not campaigning, but they're campaigning for other people, for their party's candidates. So Kamala Harris was here. Former President Donald Trump is coming to Wilmington this week. The Trump and MAGA wing of the Republican Party has another national name coming. It's Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She'll be at a Wake County GOP event. But Trump and Greene don't speak for all Republicans, just a base that's being catered to when it comes down to every vote counts when you're trying to win. So that brings us to another big name Republican who just visited Raleigh a few days ago, former President George W. Bush. Now, he wasn't here to campaign for himself or anybody else. He was here to talk to Boy Scouts. And Will, you know a little something about Boy Scouts and being a Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout yourself, right?
Yes, spent most of my first 18 years of life in the Cub Scouts and then the Boy Scouts, and I got my Eagle Scout in 2007, the Swanee River Area Council down in Florida. So, this was an event for the Occoneechee Council up here in North Carolina. For people who aren't familiar with the ins and outs of Boy Scouts, each state is broken up into a couple of councils, and this one is for kind of the central part of the state, the Triangle and Fayetteville and some of the rural counties around in the area. And they got a huge name in George Bush coming to speak. Councils have these fundraisers every year, and you do not get the former president every year. That was a big get for them. And I think they said at the event that it was a record crowd, which is not surprising. Obviously that's, a ton of people want to come out to see George Bush. Although he actually wasn't technically even the headliner at this event. The real headliner was Temple Sloan, who anyone familiar with either the Raleigh business world or the state kind of Republican political donor world is going to know. He's a huge real estate developer here in Raleigh. He's affiliated with Highwoods Properties, if people know that name. Became a billionaire selling an auto parts company to Advanced Auto Parts a couple years ago. Sanford native, who's obviously here in Raleigh now. And he had, big names, there for him too. Supreme Court Chief Justice Paul Newby did a little video for him. The former CEO of Bank of America, Hugh McCall, did a video for him. The founder of Golden Corral sent in a little video for him. Rick Hendrick from Hendrick Motorsports, so there were a bunch of big names at this event in Raleigh on Wednesday. And beyond that, any big name in the business world or really, Republican political world was there. In addition to little old me, I managed to talk my way in as well.
That's a pretty big range of businesses. I've actually been at Golden Corral lately. They have pretty good roles. So why do you think George? How did they get George Bush? Do you know? Did anybody tell you how they got Bush to come talk? I mean, he's a bigger name. He's a household name for sure, obviously, as president, more than any business or a business person or the businesses they own.
Absolutely. I imagine he was paid to speak. I mean, most former politicians make a decent amount of money on the speaking circuit. But the Bushes are just in general longtime supporters of scouting. So he might have done it out of the goodness of his heart. But he did make a joke at one point asking people to buy his book, saying, look, I'm living off a pension right now. I need your support, which as the former president. I think his pension is $400,000 a year, so he's doing okay.
Oh, a government retiree.
Yeah.
So you said you managed to get in there, but you're obviously a reporter. So what kind of rules do they have for you or anybody else as far as who was in the room and what you were doing or recording, I guess is my question at the event.
Yeah, well, a big part of the Scout law is that a Scout is trustworthy, as any fellow Eagle Scouts listening will know. So, when I signed up, I, made it very clear that I was a reporter with the Raleigh News and Observer, wasn't trying to hoodwink anybody. They did have a big message flashing on the screen right before Bush started speaking that was like, no videotaping, no pictures, no note taking, no audio recording. I don't know if that was aimed only at me or if it was aimed at just the audience in general. But I followed the rules. I was a good boy. I didn't, I probably could have recorded it if I had wanted to. I don't think anyone would have caught me, but, played by the rules at you kind of have to at a Boy Scout event.
Scout's honor, right?
Scout's honor. So afterwards, we did obviously still write an article. He was there. I mean, it was a huge deal. They raised well over $2 million for the council. So that's going to go a really long way to helping, local Boy Scout troops in the area. And, former president was there. So we wrote an article about it. I didn't quote anything that Bush said. He made a point of saying in a speech that in general, he thinks it's bad form for ex-presidents to comment on what the current president is doing. I don't know if that was a direct commentary on Trump and his fond habit of chiming in on the Biden administration or not. He never mentioned any of his successors by name, Trump or Biden or Obama. He was pretty careful not to call anybody out directly, and he said that was actually a lesson he learned from his dad, a former president himself. He was like, he knew never to call me with advice or with criticism because I was already getting so much of that. Anytime he called me, it was just with support, good little family anecdote there. And so he said he tried to, live that lesson himself by not chiming in and making headlines by commenting on what Biden or Trump have been up to in the last few years.
That's interesting. If you work in any capacity in politics, criticism is a pretty regular, torrential rain on you with occasional praise. So tell me about how would you characterize if Bush was running now or if he was president now, considering we were just talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene coming and obviously Trump, and how they've changed the party in the years since Bush was in office. And people on the other side of the aisle thought Bush was extreme in some ways in office. Do you think he would be characterized that way now or no? Or is he more of a moderate now in comparison anyway?
Well, I think certainly people still think that Bush is extreme. There are some protesters outside the event holding "Arrest Bush" signs, associated with the group Stop Torture Now. People who've been in North Carolina for a few years will remember that we were actually a key part of the CIA torture program here. They ran a lot of the flights out of Smithfield since it's close to Fort Bragg, and all of the Delta Force guys who were based down at Fort Bragg and Navy SEALs who were capturing suspected terrorists would bring them back, and then the CIA would drive them up to Smithfield or whatever, or fly them to Smithfield or however they got them there, and then take them overseas to be interrogated. So, people haven't forgotten here in North Carolina, some of the more controversial aspects of his presidency. But in general, a lot of the things he said would definitely, make him, I think, a little bit to the left of the modern day Republican Party. He spoke at length about immigration reform, obviously couched with the need for, tighter border security, which was something that he supported as president too. But you don't really hear modern day Republicans talking about the need to streamline visas and make it easier for guest workers to get into the country and find jobs. He talked about being concerned about domestic extremism and about conspiracy theories that are promulgating on the internet. All these things that the modern day Republican Party doesn't particularly want to mention at all. So it was interesting to hear some of those topics. And, I should note, this was an event with a lot of Republicans at it, and a lot of these lines got some applause. So I think that shows that, obviously Trump and his movement don't speak for all Republicans. There is definitely still some friction in the party, I think, on which direction they want to head in.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask Will what his Eagle Scout project was. And then we're going to talk about the status of voter ID and our headliners of the week. We'll be right back.
Get in the game with the college-branded Venmo debit card. Rep your team with every tap and earn up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash, a new rewards program from Venmo. No monthly fee, no minimum balance, just school pride and spending power. Get in the game and sign up for the Venmo debit card at venmo.com/collegecard. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. Select schools available. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply at venmo.me/stash terms. Max $100 cash back per month.
You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm News and Observer politics reporter Dawn Vaughan, here with Will Doran. Well, so as I mentioned before the break, you were talking about being an Eagle Scout, and George W. Bush came to Raleigh to talk to the Scouts. What was your Eagle Scout project? And if you can tell listeners too, especially since we have listeners not just in state government, but in local government, which you told me the other day at the office about how that changed your perspective on understanding how local government works too. So what was your Eagle Scout project?
Sure. Well, I think I mentioned at the top of the podcast that I grew up in Florida. So that my project had to involve sinkholes. There was a lake in Tallahassee where I grew up that had a sinkhole develop, and the lake completely drained. It just went totally dry for a few years. And there was a county park nearby that the county basically just kind of forgot about, let it fall into disrepair. But then after a few years, when I was in high school, it started filling back up with water. But the county never went back and fixed up the park. And but it was a place that I had gone to. It was near my house. And so when I was thinking about what I should do for my Eagle Scout project, I set up a meeting with the county manager and said, like, hey, there's this park. I don't know if y'all just forgot that it exists, but it looks real bad. Me and my troop would love to fix it up. So we went in, we repainted and repaired, all the picnic shelters there, some of like little kiosks with maps, because there were hiking trails and like a boat ramp. We built some benches. Of course, the Boy Scouts always want you to build something so they can put a plaque on it that says this thing was built by a Boy Scout. So we did all sorts of good stuff. Went back, several times, obviously moved up to North Carolina, but I've been back several times since I've been back home visiting my parents, and, it's still looking pretty nice. So that makes me feel happy. And, like you said, Don, it was really kind of my first interaction with, the level of government that's closest to people, which is, your local government, your county government, who keeps up your parks and all of that stuff. And, it just kind of, as a high schooler, I had never thought of, like, who's the county manager, or, what's the county's priority list for repairing the parks and rec facilities or things like that. But, it's something that, has kind of, helped me out as I've reported on local governments, in several places around the state, and obviously now at the state government level. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Any boys or girls out there who want to get involved, now that Boy Scouts also allows girls to join and get their Eagle, I would definitely suggest it. I had a lot of fun.
I've covered local government too, and we for sure know all about like parks budgets and everything else, and how all that works in county managers and town and city managers. I was in a Scouts group called Explorers in high school, which was the co-ed adventure Scouts, where I did a lot of fun stuff. So anyway, anecdotes aside, fill us in real quick on what the latest is with voter ID in the state Supreme Court, and then after that, we'll get to our headliners.
Yes, completely changing tracks. At the state Supreme Court, they recently passed down a decision. They had already decided to speed up one of our big voter ID cases. We got some more clarity on that just recently. They're going to hear that before the election in October. This trend of speeding up cases, which they've done a couple times this year, I think with it's 4 times, all with kind of politically involved cases. They've sped them up to make sure that the court hears them this year. And all of the decisions have been 4-3, with the 4 Democrats voting yes and the 3 Republicans voting no. And the Republicans are concerned that the Democrats are just doing this to get stuff done before the elections, because there are 2 seats on the court up for election this year, and both of them are held by Democrats. So if Republicans flip even just one of those 2 seats in November, they're going to take back the majority, something that they have not had on the Supreme Court since 2016. It's been 6 years of Democratic control. And so the Republicans say that this is just a cynical political move by the Democrats to speed these cases along and make sure that they can be heard by a Democratic majority. Democrats say, no, this is important. These cases were going to end up at the Supreme Court anyways, and they're huge questions that have, affect our elections, affect, big parts of civic life here in North Carolina. And it makes sense to get them done as soon as possible. And why waste time and money, dragging it out for years in the court system if we all know it's going to end up at the Supreme Court anyways? Let's just get it done with. So that's kind of the latest in that political clash at the Supreme Court, and just puts even more attention on those elections coming up later this year.
The judicial races came up in an event that Governor Cooper was at this week at Georgetown University up in D.C., and he had a question from Georgetown students, and one asked about the judicial races here. And Cooper said, "I hate partisan judicial races. We should not have partisan judicial races." And he talked about money in races, and he said that they don't have the same level as others. And he said that, quote, Democrats spent, or he and on his campaign, so obviously Democrats, spent, quote, $40 million in my race when I ran for governor. It's insane. That was how the governor described all the money into all of this. So, all right, well, we're up for headliner of the week. I'm going to go first with something lighter. Will might have something a little more serious that affects our day-to-day lives. But I am going to pick Cheerwine, the North Carolina soft drink, the cherry soda. And the reason it's my headliner is there was all this chatter this week over this video clip that WRAL reporter Travis Fain had of the governor pitching Diet Sun Drop to me as he was just putting his mic on before we talked about serious things like Medicaid expansion. But anyway, what I found as a result of that is that the North Carolina Chamber has been polling people for the coolest thing made in North Carolina, and Salisbury's own Cheerwine soda is in the running. So Cheerwine is my headliner. Will, tell me your headliner.
Well, I am a big Cheerwine fan. However, I think you're right, Don. I'll go for something a little more serious to mix things up. I'm going to go with the railroad strikes, these big national strikes that we've been seeing from railroad workers this week. It's not really something that we see a lot in North Carolina, union strikes. I'm pretty sure we're the least unionized state in the country. I think just about every year it's either us or South Carolina taking the bottom spot. So, union-led strikes are not something that's just a normal storyline here in North Carolina. But this is something that is, even though it's a national story, it's affecting tons of towns all across the state, because a lot of cities in North Carolina were founded as railroad towns, and a lot of places in this country or in the state still have, active rail lines going through the middle of downtown. They got people who work for, CSX or Amtrak or Norfolk Southern or, whatever rail lines have places going by. So I think that's been something that, even though it's a national story, has really affected a lot of local people too. Our colleague Richard Stradling wrote a nice article on it last week. You can go find that at newsobserver.com on the railroad strikes. So that's going to be my headliner.
It was really interesting that the labor negotiations lasted 20 hours. That is a long time. And when people are up on a deadline, they'll, do what needs to be done, because that would have had a massive impact across the country with supply and everything else. In the end, it sure looks like the workers got what they needed, which was really just basic things like being able to get, paid sick time off. So anyway, for the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan with Will Doran. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.